Hi, I'm Whitney Espick, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
One of the things that it is a wonderful thing when you are a teacher because you can use your teacher voice. And with the teacher voice, I'm asking if we could go on and start the next session. I know there's a very short break, but we democratically decided to get to this point. So if there are persons in the foyer, please ask them to return. And I'm asking that you would take your seats so that we can begin the next session. Thank you so much. And wait for this group right over here as we get prepared for the next session, what's happening at MIT, enhancing the Black experience. So we'll wait while those. Waiting for you. So I've been told that I should call people by name. I don't want to do that. I don't want to say it's time for Jinx to sit down. I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that. Could that be Valerie? I don't want to say that. All right, I'm going to pass this microphone off to Alyce so she can begin, and she's going to start.
Good morning. My name is Alyce Johnson, and I'm the Interim Institute Community Equity Officer. And I can actually speak louder than even the mic. I am so honored to be part of this celebration, this 50th capstone event. And I am pleased to present this panel to talk about what's happening at MIT and enhancing the Black experience at MIT. So I'd like to introduce the panel first, and then our format is that I'm going to pose a question to them to share some information. We will have questions at the end, and I thought we had mic stands. I think we will, and we'll just control the mic stands. We recognize that we are between you and lunch, so we will do our best to stay on time. So to my immediate left is La-Tarri Canty, Associate Dean for Intercultural Engagement, Dr. Cecil Webster Jr., Clinical Program Director at the Diversity Health Outreach Program, Student Mental Health and Counseling at MIT Medical, Dr. Melissa Nobles, the Kenan Sahin, Dean of School of Humanities, Arts and Sciences, Social Sciences, and Professor of Political Science, Kirk Kolenbrander, Vice President at MIT, Paula Hammond, David H. Koch Professor and Head of Department of Chemical Engineering. So, La-Tarri, we're going to start with you.
Alyce.
Oh, and Lorraine!
She forgot me.
Lorraine Goffe, Vice President of Human Resources. My apologies.
Absolutely.
Okay, there we are. And I'm doing this new thing using my phone as opposed to a piece of paper, so that's new for me. Okay, so we're going to start with you, La-Tarri. And I have a couple of questions for you. The first being, can you share with the audience the student perspective relative to the undergraduate student recommendations?
I can. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, great. I, too, will be referring to my phone because I'm more seasoned than I was when I first started at MIT 7 years ago. So I have been doing some informal surveying in the last month, and to my dismay, the majority of students were not aware of the recommendations. Those that were typically juniors and seniors that were here in 2015 when the recommendations were submitted to senior administration. And of those that are here, the students specifically focused on the recommendations that were specific to their lived experience. So they didn't have a holistic view of the recommendations, just the ones that directly impacted them, which was the financial aid recommendation, the recommendation for clinicians that mirrored the student population. One student specifically said that they were concerned that an ethics course hadn't been created through HAS. And several students said that they would like to see more diverse faculty that mirrors the student population. Overall, most of them said that there needed to be a greater awareness that the recommendations exist and that they would like to see progress reports as they are implemented.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a second question for
All
you,
right.
and that really is about student enrollment.
Yes.
Just how many students are there, and has there been an increase since the recommendations?
So I reached out to my friends in admissions, and they gave me some numbers. So in 2015, there were 106 Black students, and that was 10% of our population. In 2016, there were 105, and that's 9% of our population. In 2017, there was 107, and that was 10%. And this year, there are 111, and that again is 10%.
Thank you.
You will.
Now I do want to talk a little bit about a couple of the undergraduate recommendations. And that is, as you can see on the screen, BSU number 3 and 4, having to do with diversity orientation and follow-up.
Yes. So in 2016, we actually implemented the recommendations of the students, and that was to add a session after our largest session with national speakers that had facilitated faculty and staff facilitators that were facilitating conversations of about 20 to 30 students in spaces that URMs specifically congregate in. So we were able to do that. The unfortunate thing was because there are about 1,100 to 1,200 incoming students, we didn't have enough space on campus to congregate in spaces that URMs usually find safe space in, so we ended up doing it in classrooms. And we've been doing that since 2016, and it has been well received.
Great. And do you want to say anything about the online diversity training?
Yes. So last fall, we held some focus groups. We reached out to leadership of cultural clubs and organizations, student athletes, and student leaders from the residence halls. And we held some focus groups. We had them look at modules from companies. The modules are about an hour, a little bit over, and they gave specific feedback on what they thought worked well, what they didn't think worked well, and opportunities to change the product to make it more specific to MIT. So we had about 87% of the students say that we should move forward with that company, and that was Diversity EDU. But we have another option because there was some areas that could be improved. And so we were looking at Everfee, which also does the sexual assault training Haven. And so we're now looking at that, and we're going to, by the end of this year, make a recommendation on which company we should move forward with.
Great, thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
so much. I'm going to shift my focus to the recommendation around healthcare and ask Dr. Webster to really talk about providing us with an update.
Yes, absolutely.
And you have the slide?
I do. All right. I've been told that I should back away from my psychiatry usual loquaciousness. I think somebody used that word before. I'm going to do my best with that, but I'm going to ask that you guys hold me to that as well.
And you have 8 minutes.
And I have 8 minutes. All right. All right. So there's me. There's my name. That's what I do. We're not going to spend much time on that. But what I will say is, let me just give a very brief overview and then go into some specific recommendations that were made, in addition to what sort of changes we have over at MIT Medical and Mental Health and Counseling specifically. So briefly, many of you guys know we have a very high-achieving student population here at MIT with a lot of significant stress. Fortunately, many MIT students do seek support, and that's evidenced by our clinics being very busy, I would say. But also the culture of MIT is very much a place of independence and peer support as well, which provides its own challenges in many ways. Fortunately, we have a very multidisciplinary staff that is very focused on integrated care and working with everybody over at MIT Medical, as well as in administration and students directly. We have some very specific programs that are really flourishing. We'll get into more of that, of course. But I really want to say that overall, patients that come to us tend to be quite satisfied. I will say that our reputation tends to lag behind the services that we provide. So, in acknowledging that, let me also go ahead and talk about some other things. First things first, we have new leadership. So under the direction of Karen Singleton, who comes to us from Columbia, we've had a lot of shifts in how we think about the care that we deliver to our patients, vulnerable populations, in fact. In addition, we have a much stronger focus on multicultural competence. I think the equivalent would be sort of diversity training, but to really help our clinicians be aware and understand what particular issues affect what communities, and helping us to be much more curious about those things. That's quite important. So we have a lot of staff trainings and clinician lunches and discussions in general, but it's really imbued in our sense of clinician culture over at MIT Mental Health and Counseling as well. Regarding that first recommendation, and first of all, I was really excited to see that that was the first BSU recommendation, to have a full-time equivalent of a clinician that is well steeped in the psychological issues facing students of color. Oftentimes, mental health gets left out of these conversations in institutions like MIT, and it's just really extraordinary that that had actually been the first one. So to that, in that respect, that's how I got to know MIT, Mental Health and Counseling, MIT Medical. That's how I came on to staff there. And in addition to that, we've got a number of other staffs. Besides Karen Singleton, who is African American, of course, we have Leslie Langston, who's a clinician with us. We have a new psychiatrist, Tanisha Choice, recently. And then there's a psychiatry chief resident from Cambridge Health Alliance, a place where I trained in psychiatry as well. So I'm going to put that small plug in there, by the way. But it's one of the Harvard psychiatry programs as well. So we have many more clinicians that are, in fact, African American, but I would also emphasize that many of our staff are very good at thinking critically about racialized experiences, racial trauma, in addition to looking at things from a intersectional way. And that includes people like Eric Marks, for example, in addition to Cooper Sabatino. So that's one thing. We also have a lot more robust thinking in terms of our outreach. So we tend to keep a good overview of who's requesting information from us, who's requesting certain panels, for example, or a student group asking for certain things, or administration. So we have a new team together that looks at what these requests are, establishes the appropriate connections with what people, and that sort of thing. So we give lots of presentations all around the Institute, for example, at La Casa and Chocolate City, of course, Lucha, the BSU, BGSA, and other organizations. We also have lots of presentations about mental health to offices here on campus. MIT is a great place with lots of acronyms. I'll briefly mention some of those, of course, but OME and OMP and OGE, VPR, S Cubed, and the Rainbow Lounge and other things. I guess Rainbow Lounge being an exception in terms of being an acronym, but I'm sure you can forgive me with that. In addition to that, mental health and counseling, we like to participate in our community. So we're often a part of the programs like Black Convocation, Black Graduation, and other places where at times we get shout outs, which is also really nice, but we really just want to make sure that people understand that we're a part of everybody else here. We're here to support everybody else as well. And we're not afraid of being a part of our community. So that's also very important. And lastly, I will say that we have a number of new programs that I'm personally very excited about, and hopefully many of our students are as well. We have the Mental Health Matters group, which has actually been going on since the BSU recommendations. It's specifically tailored to graduate students of color at the BSU Lounge on Wednesdays at noon, in case anybody is interested, of course. There's a Women of Color group, which is a psychodynamic group over at Student Mental Health and Counseling. There is a LGBTQ plus student of color group over at our clinic as well. We also try to lower some of the barriers for people to come see us over at Mental Health and Counseling by having must be placed elsewhere as well. So we have brief interviews with people over at, for example, the Office of Multicultural Education, Minority Education. In addition to having a newly established sexuality and gender team and an international students team, again, very much focused on areas of intersectionality. I've been told I have a very brief amount of time left, so let me also just touch on some of the places that we're going in the future. Our department has participated in the inaugural Stephen Fund strategy meeting in New York. And this is a mental health organization really focused on the mental health of students of color. And of course, in a very minor way, but I think a very important way, we're also revamping our website to be a lot more user-friendly. Again, trying to lower those barriers for people to come to see us and know that we're just ordinary, wonderful, and very talented people, I hope. And also letting people know who exactly we are. So I think that's about all the time I have, yeah?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. May I have the click?
Absolutely.
So I'd like to move to you, Dean Nobles, and ask you about the HAS recommendation that was put forward to have a newly designated immersion studies program, and also any other comments you'd like to make about how you were addressing the cultural needs that students have expressed.
Sure, thank you. So the, as we understood and as I understood in the immersion studies has selected, an idea was to introduce students to broad cultural, to gain greater cultural sensitivities and competencies and knowledge. And nearly, and much of SHAS in certain ways is committed to that overall goal. But I wasn't in support and did not didn't recommend and support this recommendation for two reasons, and then I'll say what it is that what we've been doing. The first is largely intellectual. Within HAS, we have humanities, we have arts and social sciences, each of which are distinct disciplines and which deal quite directly with different issues having to do with global issues, racial issues, ethnic and the like. A political scientist thinks about racial politics one way, an economist another, literature another, philosophy another. Each of these are deeply entrenched in disciplines, and there isn't one class that can cover that. And so rather than think about one class, students already have 8 HAS electives. And across our offerings in each one of these parts of the house, as I call it, humanities, arts, and social sciences, there are classes that deal directly with these issues. In fact, over nearly 30% of our offerings this year have something to do with either culture, global stuff, or race. So there's a ton of variety, and if students in taking HAS requirements can easily avail themselves of the classes that we offer. The second has to do with, and you all being alums, you know this, a lot of students think of taking their HAS classes as something like taking their medicine. It's not as if, it's not as if they're looking to take it anyway. The notion of tying on top of that something where they would be resistant to it would seem to me to be completely counter what we know to be true about how students approach their HAS classes. So rather of thinking about it as taking your medicine or eating your broccoli, we thought it better to think about as letting students know the offerings with which we have. Now, one of the things that the School of Humanities, Arts, and Sciences has to deal with, and this was true when you all are here and it continues today, is that there's a lot that goes on at MIT and breaking through the noise, right, to get students to know what it is that we offer. And a lot of that has to do with advising. And under the current new Vice Chancellor, Ian Waits, thinking about education, a big part of his, one of his efforts has been to help us be more creative in our advising, to get students to recognize that we have these HAS classes. So, and that they should take this. Let me say a bit more about that. So this year, or last year, there was an experimental class on the first year experience. And thinking about if students had to redesign it, what would it look like? And as a result of that class, there were 2 recommendations. And one of the recommendations they found was that students wanted more time to explore. And they wanted to use their first year as a way to do that. So there were some adjustments made over the summer. And this year we have found, this first year with this experiment, within HASS and indeed within all of the a lot of the departments which aren't connected to GIRs, we're seeing higher enrollments, and we're certainly seeing that in HASS and SHASS across all of our disciplines. So it seems to me what's more important is the signaling, right? That A, choices matter, B, take advantage of those choices, and be open-minded. If students listen to those signals, there is a ton within SHASS in particular, and in the School of Architecture and Planning, particularly urban studies, that students can avail themselves of. Finally, under Professor Helen Lee, who is head of Women and Gender Studies, she started My Sister's Keeper, which is supported by SHASS, and it's been hugely, this is geared primarily African-American women, though we've now also started one for Latina students. And it's a way to get together. There are different kinds of support groups, social activities, study groups, study breaks, yoga breaks, you name it. But the point is, it's building community in a way in which the students are kind of the authors of the experiences that they want to have, and that is encouraged by WGS. So why I certainly was supportive of the spirit of the recommendation. That is, more students should be exposed to different things, and particularly those things that have to do with racial identity, cultural identity, and such, as they are taught in SHASS. I couldn't recommend one class, but rather would encourage students to think about the range of classes that we offer across the disciplines.
Thank you. We now come to Kirk. Kirk, oh, no, what? Paula, oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe we should do Paula.
No, we should go in order. It's Kirk's turn.
Okay.
We're doing
Well,
Paula.
I would like to actually go to you, Kirk, just to kind of finish up the student recommendations. Or just even what is the student experience and how are students making this a better world?
Thank you, Alyce. It's been so much fun to be sitting here the last few minutes and to look out on all of your faces. I've been at MIT for about 30 years and played a number of different roles, including starting on the faculty in Course 3. So I see former Course 3 students, I see MIT leadership students, I see my friends in BAMIT and the MIT Alumni Association, and so it's wonderful to be here. And it's wonderful to get to talk about how our students have opportunities to make a better world, particularly when this panel follows the MIT and Slavery Group, which has just done brilliant work that is making a fundamental difference in not only how to make a better world, but how to make a better MIT. You know, because if we're really going to be serious about education, research, and innovation to make a better world, we darn well better be serious about how to make a better MIT. And I heard Charlotte talk about who's included in the us and in our values, and Kelvin and his insight in terms of who has a voice and where silence exists in our own community. And I think this is profoundly important. This work that they're leading is profoundly important in terms of how MIT understands itself. I mean, the discussion at the very end was, these are not questions of 2018, these are questions since 1861, and coming to terms with what that means. Second place that the students have been our teachers, not only in this MIT and slavery, but in the recommendations. And I've had the privilege of working closely with the students from the start as we've talked about how to implement these recommendations in different forms. And from the very first day, after the students and President Reif yesterday talked about the historic academic council meeting. I've been going to academic council meetings for 15 years. I've never seen one like on December 1 of 2015. That was a magnificent day. And I sat with the student leaders immediately after that, and Rashid, August, who is the lead on the BSU side, and I said, Rashid, what's the most important one? Where should we start? And Rashid said, the most important is, can we please get every academic unit at MIT, this is BSU number 10, to simply say out loud that they value us as persons more than they value our ability to perform on problem sets. Well, first of all, that's a sad day when that becomes the most important recommendation, because that's where we are. And yet, thank you for saying it. And that began a process then that has allowed us to, in fact, implement those statements. But more importantly, Melissa and I were just at a department heads lunch the beginning of this week. The Department of Chemistry has been a trailblazer in some of this space, and they now have a standing committee on the quality of life. So this committee sits next to the Graduate Admissions Committee and the Undergraduate Curriculum Committee. They have a committee on the quality of life. Well, thank you, chemistry, and I hope that we can see that spread to all departments. Because it's high time that we articulate how it is that we treat each other as a fundamental priority for who we are. And you can draw very clear lines between that BSU 10 effort and what is now a thriving effort in the departments, what we call the Mind, Hand, Heart Department Support Project, which is all about bringing resources to the departments to help them around issues of how we support each other in this intense and rigorous environment, which must never change, right? MIT must be rigorously elite. Everybody in this room wants MIT to be rigorously elite. But that is in no way in contrast to being a place where we can care for each other as individuals. Then the third thing I would just highlight in terms of how do our students make a better world is the way that our students and alumni are now working together on Hack for Inclusion, which is something born out of BAMIT. And so Elaine Harris and Lisa Egwanu-Davis have been sort of the leads in this effort. Hack for Inclusion, I think, I just talked to Elaine, is February 22 and 23 of 2019. And Elaine, that's the third year, right? Yes. And it's just a marvelous time for our alumni and students to come together in search of and in developing solutions for making a better world. Because ultimately what we're doing here is preparing our students to be you and to be out in the world using education, research, and innovation to address fundamental issues of poverty, of education, of hunger and homelessness, of health. This is MIT when it's its best. And so how we prepare, how we give our students not only that rigorous preparation, but help them connect with their passion so that they can be a part of experiences right here and then move into the world where all of you are and carry that voice of MIT to the world.
Thank you. Paula, now.
Paula,
No.
soon to be creating a quality of life committee.
Or equivalent.
Or equivalent.
So I want to say, I want to acknowledge and thank you for that incredible report. It's now known as the Hammond report, but in fact, I think it's officially known as the Initiative for Race and Faculty
Race
Initiative.
That's right.
And that was a few years ago, I think it was 2010. But I'm wondering at this point, and from your lens now as a department head, could you just give us some sense of where we should go from here, or any advice or any guidance? And I'm certainly looking for some.
Absolutely. I think this is a great time to start this conversation again. In 2010, we
had a very significant report, and the committee put a lot of work into understanding ways in which we might be able to address faculty diversity and other kinds of diversity on campus. And two areas that we really focused on were recruiting and climate for faculty. And I think that we have made some progress in terms of numbers, but I don't think that we have had a transformation. And I think what we really want is a transformation. We want to reach a critical mass where we see faculty of color everywhere we turn. And I think that's something that MIT can accomplish. I've been a part of MIT for a long time as an undergrad and a grad student and as a faculty member. I know that we have the power to do this. One of the things that we talked about in 2010 was the idea of a strategic structure from the top going all the way through to the departments. And I think that is still going to be important in accomplishing what we are trying to do. We had recommended that there be sort of from the president and provost office some dissemination of idea of putting together strategies, strategic plans within the school, and the school working with departments to put together strategic plans. And if that is something that we can do universally, and hopefully at the same time, I think it makes a difference. And the reason I say that is because I think the progress, what we have done, and we've certainly done a lot to address climate and culture among the students, and Mind, Hand, Heart has done a lot to help us with the culture of inclusion. But until we get a driving mandate that is clear to every department, I think that we won't get this sort of large-scale motion. And I say that for several reasons. As a department head, I can give the perspective of knowing that we have several ongoing needs. Department heads are forever thinking about everything from finding the top talent when they're doing their recruiting to getting the best graduate students and maintaining and getting faculty through promotion processes. There are a number of things that can distract unless there is a mandate. One of the things I was really fortunate to experience was becoming department head in August of 2015. The BSU report came out later that year, and it included a reiteration of some of the recommendations that we had. That was the first time that we actually had a voice saying, departments talk about a strategy. Before that, all departments weren't asked across the board to put together a strategy. And that gave me leverage to go to my faculty and say, we hear from the provost and the dean that we not only need to put together a statement, but let's talk about our strategy. We've never had a written or articulated strategy in the past. So of course, we have a strategy that is very brief that is put into a website, but that led to a faculty meeting that was animated and engaged faculty on every level with ideas. After that meeting, I got emails from faculty, including a number of our young faculty, our white male faculty, our female and faculty of color, everyone sort of shooting ideas. I get in the elevator and have faculty giving me ideas. And that kind of conversation or discussion happens when there is a push. We need the push. So although I do believe that it's wonderful to have articulated efforts that work out beautifully within individual departments, unless we have a common theme that is very clearly expressed, we won't really have that transformational moment. And I think that's something that MIT needs to lead in. I think we have the unique ability to do that. I did think about some of the things that we have that are unique, and I think one of them is represented by this room. We have a cohort of people of color. We have people of color who are outstanding and are working everywhere, and I think we could probably use that network more effectively. I do think that we can also use that network to help us gain more traction when we're trying to recruit. One of the things I have learned is that in particular in recruiting graduate students, that it has become, it's been difficult, but it's become more difficult in part because as we have adjusted our admissions process, actually, to try to incorporate ideas that would allow us to look in more broad circles. We bring students to our campus, and they look around and they say, where is everybody? And I think we can use all the backup that we can within the Institute and beyond to let people know that this is an environment where you can grow and prosper. And that messaging is something that we have to hit hard, and like any advertising campaign, you have to hit it constantly and frequently. I do think that we have essentially an ability here at MIT to attract the best talent. And we have resources. And I would love to see those resources used in imaginative ways to be able to increase the faculty of color that we're able to attract. Finally, in terms of climate, mentoring was one of the key things that we found was core to maintaining our faculty of color. And we found that there were differences in the experiences of faculty with respect to the mentoring that they were able to access. Over time, I believe now just about every department in the schools of science and engineering have some form of mentoring program. And I think the next level is to train our mentors, which was also mentioned in the report, so that they are more enabled to mentor people of color as well as women. I think our mentors can be wonderful, they can be fantastic, but they can be tone deaf if they are not given some context, and I think that would be extremely helpful.
Great, thank you so much. So I appreciate hearing your lens, faculty, students. I'm now going to turn it over to Lorraine Goffe as Vice President of Human Resources, just to share a little bit about staff here.
Great. Thank you, Alyce. And so I want to take a bit of an approach of looking at an assessment of diversity and inclusion here at MIT. I've been at MIT now for almost 4 years, about 3.5 years or so. And when I arrived, I wanted to look at diversity and inclusion to get a sense of where we have been and where we want to go as an organization from a staff diversity perspective. And so I took a look at diversity, and my sense was that all the key elements are in place. We're a government contractor, so we have an affirmative action plan, and we have a compliant affirmative action plan. We've got all the things we're supposed to have to ensure that we are compliant with the federal regulations. And if used well, affirmative action can be a vehicle to help diversify your workforce. So that was in place. We have resources. We have staff focused on diversity. So Alyce, for example, was the manager of diversity in human resources. And there are others across the Institute and the DLCs that focus on diversity for the staff in their units. So we have people focused on that. And we look at programming. We've got training programs around unconscious bias, interviewing techniques and selection. We have dialogue sessions. We have various events where we celebrate diversity. So all the things you'd want to have in place, we seem to have in place. So my next step, once we checked sort of those things off the box, the next step for me was looking at outcomes. You know, what do these efforts do for us, and what's the impact of the work that we do? And so that has been the focus of some members of my team for the last 2.5 years or so. And so I want to share with you very briefly some of our findings, and then talk to you a little bit about what we're going to try and do about some of the things that we're learning. So we're going to look a little bit look at data. And I'll say to you, when I look at data, I tend to like to look at trend data, so look at data over time. So we did a 10-year look back, where we are today, looking back 10 years, and where are we? And my thought is that if we want to move forward, we've got to understand where we've been and the impact of the things that we're doing has had on our progress. And so I'll share with you that the diversity of our workforce from a staff perspective has not changed significantly over the last 10 years. We are about in the same place we've been. There have been some areas we've made progress, and unfortunately some areas where we've fallen behind as well. But in general, we are about the same. And specifically, when we look at gender, we look at women, we have been stable over the last 10 years, hovering around 40% or so. When we look at our peer institutions in higher education, we lag by about 15 percentage points. But we're also a different sort of school, right? Because it's a STEM organization. I don't know that it impacts staff necessarily, but we do have to think about the context. And so we know that we might be a bit different than other schools, but we are lagging a little bit. And then, of course, we think about the region. We are in New England, and that could potentially, maybe not from a gender perspective, from a race perspective, may have an impact. So we try to look at all the pieces. But what we know is we're lagging a little bit, and in some key areas. But I will say to you that, and of course, women tend to be in support roles, about 75%, less so in some of the service roles. And we look at the service roles tend to be mostly the union population, fewer there. But there are some bright spots on the gender perspective. So women have actually increased in the senior management ranks by about 9% in the last 10 years. So that's definitely a bright spot on the gender side. When we look at race, there is some good news. The minority population has increased by about 20%, which is very good. That population, the growth has tended to be with Asians and the Hispanic population. And of course, when you look at minorities versus non-minorities, you have to break the minority population apart because each minority group is actually positioned differently. There are more favored minorities and least favored minorities, and so we have to look at that as well. And of course, we have to look at context in terms of our region. The Black population has actually declined slightly. And so that's something that we need to really focus on. When we look at the minority population, they tend to be highest in the service area, again, the union population primarily, but some others as well, and tend to be lowest on the admin population. Those are in exempt positions, the ones that we might refer to as professional staff for the most part. But what's interesting when we look at this data is that there's also an increase in the group on the ethnic and race side that we refer to as unknown. People who have chosen not to self-identify, race and ethnicity. And that population has increased significantly over the last decade. We now have about 10% of our population that chooses not to self-identify. 10 years ago, we were somewhere close to 6% or so. That can significantly change the numbers when you think about that population. We've got about 10% of the population that we just don't know what their race and their ethnicity is. And so that's an area that we really have to focus on to try to understand. As we break that group apart, what we know is that about 70% of that unknown population, they're under the age of 45. And about 35% of that population is under the age, 36% of that population under the age of 35. So we think there could be a generational factor happening here. They may simply view race and gender differently, or may frankly not want to be categorized in that way. We're trying to understand more about that population, and so we're doing some work to address that. We also do look at other elements of diversity and inclusion. So we are looking at the disabled population, we're looking at veterans. Those numbers are lower than the benchmarks, lower than we would want to see. And again, the question is that because people are choosing not to self-identify and share the information, or do we really attract fewer veterans and fewer members of the disabled community than our peers do? I'm not sure that's accurate, but we have to learn more about that. But I want to then talk about what we're doing. So now we have a better understanding of the data. We're trying to focus on what we can do about it. 2.5 years ago, we created a tool that we call Enriching Diversity. And it's a tool, it's simply a system that allows us at every step in the selection process to try to understand what's happening. Because when I think about race and gender, we know we attract a diverse applicant pool. People apply for jobs here. The question is, where do we lose them in the process? Is it at the first stage of screening? Is it at the first round of interviews or the second round of interviews, or at that point when the decision is made by that hiring manager about that one job in their organization? Where do we lose people in the process? So we're trying to understand that. That tool's available to the whole community, so any hiring manager can look at that system and they can see their applicant pool compared to their workforce and what's happening along the way. And that data will help us, again, understand if there are places we need to intervene in this process. We're also increasing awareness of leadership. So most units have someone doing diversity in their organization. But it wasn't clear to me that leaders were really aware of what their role was in making sure they helped drive this forward. So I have shared information with the administrative vice presidents, and we're beginning to talk about what their role is and how they can support the diversity professionals in their organization to try to move things forward. And for many of them, it's the first time they've seen some information, seen some of this data. So I think it's been quite helpful to have the conversations. And I will say to you that in everyone that I've spoken to, they have been committed and supportive of this topic. It's simply knowing how to address it, I think, has been the challenge. How the these numbers are going to change based on that individual hiring decision, the individual decision to promote something in your organization. When you think about it as just your unit as opposed to the organization as a whole, you may not think about that longer term impact. So increasing awareness has been part of the role that I've been trying to play. And then I'll just share with you, and I know I'm running out of time here, I'll just share with you that my sense is that we have to be very intentional about what we do here. Again, we've made some progress, and we have been focused, and we have resources, and we're doing all the things we need to be doing. But if we want to change the outcomes and change the results, so we're not here 10 years from now looking backwards and finding ourselves having the same conversation, we have to really focus. And the review we're doing around staff diversity is to try to understand how we deck those resources that we have to have the greatest impact.
Great, thank you. So join me in thanking the panelists. Different information. Thank you. Wondering if there are questions. If you have a question, please go to the mic and address your question to the panelists.
Hi, thank you all. My question for the HAS requirements. So I graduated class of 2015. I remember these conversations, and again, the intention being that a lot of people opt out. All right, the people who would be most wanting to take those kinds of HAS courses, if we have so many available, what percentage of them are, but if they're, for example, white males, what percentage of white males are actually taking those classes that are going to teach more about culture or global studies or things? So the thought of making it a requirement was to make sure that no one can opt out of doing that because they might not realize the importance and the impact it can have of taking those kinds of classes. So is there something that the HAS department is doing to highlight courses where you will be able to learn about other cultures or race, making it more obvious on the website, or would it be possible to force one of the 8 HAS classes we have to take to be within a subset across the different disciplines, political science, arts, whatever appeals to you, that still gets to accomplish that so that students can't opt out of that kind of education?
It's certainly true that students make all kinds of choices about what classes they're going to take. And I think the feeling of many of the HAS faculty are, as it is, we're dealing with trying to get students' attention about a range of issues, including race and ethnicity, and gender, and the like. The hope would be that students will, either through advising, we've put up on our website the classes that are available every semester that have to do with diversity. We have certain of our units make quite aggressive outreach, certainly our our humanities classes. The faculty are constantly reaching out through TEAS, through gender and women's studies, tons of ways to get students interested. So the goal is to get students, I guess, we hear all the time, at least I hear, students crying about, all students crying about more and more requirements, already resentful of HAS in general. That's just a fact. And so I think what we thought was, the faculty in general feel that we want students to take our classes because they want to. And our job is to make them attractive, and we attempt to do that. But we can't do it alone within CHES. It can't be, here's my concern, it can't be that when the vast majority of students are not HAS majors, are engineering and science majors, that HAS is the school that ends up taking all of the weight when all of the other schools have responsibility. Part of what we do is to try to reach out. And when we do, I think we punch above our weight in that regard, and we will continue to do so. But the responsibility of getting students interested cuts across the institute. And I think part of the genius of the BSU recommendations, particularly that having to do with the diversity statement, as Paula mentioned, was getting that conversation going in units where it doesn't happen. Those kind of conversations are going to happen in HAS, for the most part, because the subject matter, this is what we talk about all the time. But other parts of this institute, that's not happening. And the modeling, the students aren't necessarily modeling themselves after their philosophy professor. They are modeling themselves against their engineering professor, their physics professor, their chemistry professor. So it seems to me that, you know, my view, and I'm speaking now also in part of the HAS faculty, was to push the weight back over, saying, we do what we're supposed to do. Y'all do your jobs.
Question?
Yes. Hello, my name is Corshay Williams. I am a first year studying in course 5. And I had a question about the Women of Color group. I'm actually involved in the Women of Color group, and I was just, when it was recommended to me by Ms. Leslie Langston, I was very excited about it, but a little discouraged by the fact that I do like how personalized and intimate the group is, but one of my concerns is that is there any intention on expanding the group to encompass more women of color?
Oh, that's actually, that's a very good question. Just to restate that slightly, it sounds like you've been involved with that group and wonder if we're going to expand it.
Yes.
The fortunate thing is that I think there is a lot of interest in doing so. The unfortunate thing is that we are a finite body. We would love to offer 24/7 programming around the board, psychoeducationally, psychodynamically, but we don't always have enough time, enough people, enough resources, especially when acuity can really vary. Like October is a very difficult time. November is a very difficult time to be a clinician at MIT. But let's say February, it may not be. But what I will say is that you're certainly onto something in terms of our shared interest in having this be, and not just women of color group. There are lots of different groups that I think desperately need to have a space where they can speak freely about their experiences and hopefully have people to hear their experiences and support them. And so the Women of Color group, I think, is a really great example of that. And certainly we do hope to expand that. And hopefully we'll have the time, energy, finances, resources, all those things necessary to do so.
Thank you.
Yes.
And one thing I would say is that in our own department, we've been talking about whether we want to have groups that might be able to support either students of color or women students. I think within departments and within schools, we also have the ability to try to create communities that can be supportive. And I think picking up on Melissa's point, maybe the kind of expansion that is desired would be, for example, people of color in engineering or something like that, that there are subgroups that can also provide different kinds of support.
Go over here.
Yes, hi. My name is John Gonzalez. I'm class of 82. I was encouraged to hear from Lorraine about the availability of training classes for faculty and staff around diversity and inclusion and bias in hiring and interviewing. What I'm wondering is there any requirement on the part of faculty or particularly advisors and particularly department heads to have a course of training and education about how to be better at fostering diversity in their departments or fostering diversity amongst the teams they're leading, or is it optional for them as well?
There is no mandatory training requirement on this topic or any other topic for the most part in the sort of the people space, but it certainly is encouraged, and there are many areas where they do training. And so many search committees go through training before they, at the beginning of the process to make sure that the process is as inclusive as possible, and people will have how to sort of manage biases in those conversations. Again, it's not mandatory, but many units do training across the institute.
So it's not treated like a sexual sexual harassment training or anything like that?
It's not treated in that same way. And for some of you may know, but we recently completed sexual misconduct training, online training. But even there, we didn't say it was mandatory, even though I'll say to you that almost 100% of our faculty and staff completed that training. Mm-hmm. We're down to something like 6 people who haven't done it. 9,400 people have done it. But even then, we didn't use the word mandatory, but the community rose up and did what needed to be done, and it was completed.
And I'll just add to that, too, because one of the recommendations was to have more training available for search committees, at least. I think right now I'm in the process of discussing training for our faculty at our retreat. We have an annual retreat every January, which would include essentially creating an inclusive climate. which would include some of these aspects, even though you can only fit so much into an afternoon. The idea is to launch that. And actually, I have spoken with my colleague, Tim Jameson, who's the department head in chemistry, a few months ago, and have started to plan this idea of having research lab by research lab training that includes the faculty member in each one of those. So that will hit parts of the community, but not all of it. There's some idea of cross-cutting against or with cohorts. So the undergraduates with TAs, you know, there are other communities that we have to address. This is why I mentioned that if we have you know, some things are good top-down. MIT is a beautifully bottom-up place. Right. But the reason for the high compliance is because the provost told the department heads, we want everybody in your department to take this training. And so it was a kind of mandatory with parentheses, but it was mandatory. Because we wrote everyone in our department who did not take the training until they took the training.
Yeah. Lots of follow-up.
I think we can do the same thing. I think we understand that sometimes things happen because we have put together a strategy, and the way the strategy will work is if we have the largest participation possible, and then department heads and deans can do their job to encourage.
Right. And we were persistent. We were clear about what we want to accomplish. We were persistent, and I think that's exactly what we need to do here. Yeah. The consistency and the persistence.
And there's inspection and questioning by the provost as follow-up, I assume, with the department heads. There's questioning and inspection by the provost of the department heads behind that suggestion, right?
There's questioning. I can't quite make
Oh,
up.
and inspection.
Inspection.
And is there peer pressure applied?
Well, so we were actually, for the Title IX completion, which was introduced very rapidly, first the department heads were trained within each of the councils. Academic, well, I mean, there's engineering council, school council, et cetera. And then the department heads were encouraged, so we told our faculty, you know, you're taking this, you know. The anticipation is that you will want to engage. And so we use the right language, but we essentially were given reports on which departments had 100% first.
Right.
So yes, we competed.
Yeah, that was me.
And I think we can compete on the diversity thing. I think the reason that if we get departments all engaged with a strategic plan at the same time, we can learn from our neighbors and compete with our neighbors. We like that. We're MIT. Yeah. I mean, that's the way it works.
This showed us that we actually can do it.
Yeah.
And this demonstrated that where there's a will, we can actually get it done.
Okay. So my apologies. We're going to just take one more question. And those of you that are at the mic, I encourage you to visit with the panelists at lunchtime. So. May I ask you to?
My name's Catherine Cornwell. I got my PhD here in 1975. We have just instituted mandatory faculty training in diversity and inclusion at Syracuse University, where I teach. I have taken it. It was like 3 hours, and it was BS to me. I want to know how you know when that stuff is successful and who plans it?
And what was the last part?
Plans it.
Okay, so actually, I'll step out of the moderator role because part of the diversity, part of my role was doing, hopefully not BS diversity and inclusion training. And I will say, part of my approach was to be specific. So when you say diversity and inclusion planning, well, what does that mean? Because that to me is very broad. So we do offer, through human resources, a series of different focused workshops. Unfortunately, yes, they are 3 hours, but we're learning how to adapt some of those. And it's on a variety of different issues as you think about having an inclusive team or group, and that's really what we're focusing on. It's not really about trying to change who you are, What we are trying to do is influence who you are when you show up here and what MIT's expectation of your behavior and how you connect with your groups, the people that you manage, and even the people around in the community. So a little off topic, it's not around faculty, but I'd love to follow up with you because I want to find out what is BS about it because I don't want to fall into that trap. Yes, great. Thank you. So again, I want to thank our panelists. Thank you. I want to thank all of you, and just want to share some information. You can take a picture of this. If you're interested in seeing, we didn't share with you all of the undergraduate and graduate student recommendations, but if you are interested, certainly find one of the alumni staff, or you can certainly give me your contact information and we'll make sure you have it. BAMIT also has a set of recommendations that we can send to you. And we also wanted to use this as a commercial to share with you one of the Alumni Association's new mentoring, which is called the Advisors Hub. It is alumni mentoring other alumni. So if you'd like to be a mentor, we would ask you to go to that site. If you want mentoring or want to be a mentee, again, visit that site. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Oh.
Please, before you go, a couple of things I wanted to say. I have not put on my BAMIT chairperson hat today, but I do want to put it on for just a few minutes before we break for lunch, because I wanted you to understand that part of the reason that you're here today is because BAMIT has had a strategy over the last few years to engage in this space of understanding what's happening at MIT and being a part of it. And when the students actually pull together their recommendations, in fact, this is pretty much how I met Kirk Kolenbrander for the first time. Well, actually, I met him in Chicago first, but this is several years later. And we met because BAMIT was providing its own recommendations that we had been working on in the advocacy efforts within BAMIT. And so that's a part of you, and I wanted you to know that we are working on your behalf, and our strategy in having you here today is to have you come and be a part of our efforts, because we can't do this work alone. It's very important. And so this, the BAMIT platform on diversity and the Black experience at MIT, this is something that we're in the process of realizing after 3 years we need to revamp. And so consequently, this is the topic that we're talking about today. We're going to talk about it again this afternoon with students, and we're going to get their perspective. And if you notice, that's a closed session, so that's just us and students telling us about what their perspectives are and what's going on. So just wanting to let you know that we need your assistance and that we're going to move forward. And I wanted you to know that we're not just coming together today to have a conference where we're just, hey, man, I haven't seen you in, this many years. No, it really is about strategies and structures that we need to put in place going forward. And so we'll be talking more about our advocacy efforts. We're going to be talking about the BAMIT Community Advancement Program and the fund. We're going to talk all about that today because we can't move forward without you. And so I just wanted to take that opportunity to do that little commercial about BAMIT and the board and you and what we need to be doing together. So we are going to break now for lunch. We will have to be back here promptly, probably at about 1:20, because the next thing that we're going to have is our BAMIT, the President's Office, President's Panel. So we want to start that on time. I understand that President Rife likes to start promptly. So we are going to be back here and ready to go for 1:30. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.